Hello, everyone. Hi, everybody's joining us right now for our webinar tonight. Thanks for jumping on the call. I'm Lars Capitici, the Director of Programs from the Anthroposophical Society in America, and I'm here with the fabulous Mary Stewart Adams. So glad. We're both in different places in the world right now. I'm actually in Spring Valley, New York for the Questions of Courage Youth Conference. And Mary, where are you?
I am in Northeast Lower Michigan.
Awesome.
So,
Okay.
tip of the mitt, but on the Lake Huron side, which is on the opposite side of the state from where I live.
Okay, excellent. Does the sky look any different there?
Well, yeah, you get the sunrise over here. So you get the east-facing view over the Great Lake. I live with a west-facing view over Lake Michigan. So tomorrow morning I'll be up with the sun over here, over Lake Huron, and then go home to get sunset over Lake Michigan.
Oh, that's so nice. Well,
Yeah,
we would like to know where everybody else is, right? So what we'd like you to do is, if you have a second, if you could type into the Q&A just where you are in the world right now, so we can say hi to you. That would be super. So just go right in that Q&A and tell us where you are. And Mary, I'm so glad to have you here again. You've done some great creative webinars with us on all different topics, and now we're sort of moving into this interesting phase where we're talking about the divine feminine a bit more, and so people should stay tuned because there's going to be more of that happening over time. But yeah, let's see where some people are typing in the chat and some people are typing in the Q&A, and I'm trying to see all of that. I can't see the Q&A right now. So if people want to use the chat, okay, that'd be great. Even better.
silly.
Yes. Okay, Carol from Sarasota. Carol Ann and Seeley from Soliers Grove, Wisconsin. Anybody else?
Soldiers Grove.
Soldiers Grove. That's great. Okay. Cassandra from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Thank you so much for joining us. That's fantastic. Anybody else want to just type in the chat? My Q&A function isn't really working right now, so we're going to use chat today. Anybody else? Okay, I know there are a few more people, but thank you so much for being here with us. And I'm just going to turn it over to our star lore historian. Bless you.
Thank you.
Oh, here we go. Here's some more people. Eileen in Vermont says hello, and Paulette in Evanston, Illinois says hello. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here in kind of the middle of the summer. Sort of, getting close to fall. So Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you because you really know much more about what's going on in the seasons and the stars right now than I do. So
right, okay.
Thank you everyone for coming in. I see Indianapolis there too. Thanks everybody. And we're going to use the chat today.
All right, so thank you, Laura. And also I want to say thank you to everybody that joins in and for the invitation from the Anthroposophical Society in America to share my work and research about what are the stories in the stars right now. And I was recently interviewed by someone for a program I'm doing out west in Oregon. And he asked me, well, why does this matter? And this is somebody that's not related to the Anthroposophical community. And I had to share with him that part of why this work is so important is because when we lose the sight of the stars and we don't know their names and we don't know the history of where those names come from, then we're being kind of cut off from our cultural history. And that matters a great deal as we move forward toward experiences where an appreciation for cultural diversity is really necessary for us to find our way. And so one of the ways that we can celebrate that and honor that is to learn through what the stars are showing us. What are the tales that human beings have told themselves about themselves in relationship to one another, to the earth, to their celestial environment through all ages of humanity? So that's why it matters. So today, August 7th, is known in the Chinese tradition as the seventh night of the seventh moon. And so that's why we picked the title for this webinar. It's specific to a festival that's really important in the Chinese culture. So we can go to the next slide there, Laura. I don't think I have the capacity to switch slides, right? It's you.
And you know what? It's not letting me switch slides. Here we go. Oh, I've got it. Thank you. Here we go.
Okay.
All right, perfect.
All right, so the first slide I wanted to show everyone is actually a picture of a sky map from Michigan State University Abrams Planetarium. And this shows us the brightest stars in the sky for the month of August. And if there are folks that are calling in that aren't seeing the screen, I think they will get copies of the slides. So this is just showing us the brightest things. And what I want to point out is that as you look at this map, north is at the top of the circle, south is at the bottom. Because this is a map that you use for looking at what's over your head, you have to put it over your head to get the correct orientation, because east and west are on the opposite sides of this map, as they would be from a map of the Earth. But what I want to point out is the constellation Cassiopeia, which is in the top left quarter of the map. That's right where the Milky Way comes through. So it kind of arcs through where Cassiopeia is, then sweeps down where you see Cygnus the Swan, and comes between the two stars Vega and Altair, and then it continues on between the constellations Sagittarius and Scorpio. So you'll have this map, but I want to point out in particular, Jupiter and Saturn at the bottom of the map. Jupiter is in Scorpio, Saturn is in Sagittarius. Right now they're standing on opposite sides of the thickest part of the Milky Way. So even though the Milky Way isn't drawn on this map, just so that you can kind of have a spatial orientation. But then also the seventh night of the seventh moon has to do with these two stars, Vega and Altair, which are part of that summer triangle there. And they are two of the brightest stars in the summer sky. They show up pretty early in the twilight, so you'll be able to see them if the skies are clear where you are tonight and you're in the Northern Hemisphere. Go out and look probably around 10 p.m. Eastern time, and looking straight up, you'll see Vega, and then down to the southeast, you'll start to see Altair. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, and I'll just tell a little bit of the story about those two stars, because sometimes this is referred to culturally, at least in contemporary culture, as Chinese Valentine's Day. So it's considered the most romantic night of the year. And what happens is, in Chinese calendar rules for the festival cycle, the celebration or the observance of winter solstice, which happens on December 21st, always has to come in their 11th month. So in the Chinese calendar, winter solstice is in the 11th month, whereas in the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that most of us are using, excuse me, winter solstice happens in December, which is the 12th month. And so this is why the dating of the new year and the festivals in the Chinese calendar seem to be 1 month off from the Gregorian calendar, because technically we're at the 8th moon of the year. But in the Chinese calendar, we're in the 7th moon that happened on July 31st. And now this is the 7th night from that moon. And if you watch every year in the sky, the week following that moon, you'll see a beautiful waxing crescent moon. It shows up in the evening sky in the west after the sun has set, and then it starts to sweep toward the thickest region of the Milky Way. So it's really a gorgeous time to get oriented to the night sky and to go stargazing. There are active meteor showers if you have planets involved. It's just a really, really lovely time of year. And so it's not happenstance that this would be the time in a particular culture when you celebrate love and romance. So I'm not going to tell the entire tale, but there's several different versions of it. But basically, the star Vega, which is one of our brightest stars, is the weaving princess in the story. And her beloved is the cowherd. That's the star Altair. And because of the course of events in their life, they're forced to separate, and they're placed on opposite side of the mighty Milky Way river of stars. And the sky god only allows them to come together one night a year. And that's the 7th night of the 7th moon, and that's tonight. And so they come to the opposite sides of this great river of stars, and they don't know how they're going to cross to one another. But then they look above them and see this, it looks like a gray cloud, but they hear this whirring sound. And as it settles down between them, they see that it's all the magpies in the kingdom have gathered together. They land on the Milky Way river between them, and spreading out their wings, they create a bridge so the lovers can cross to one another for their night of bliss. So when you look in the sky, and actually, if we can go back one slide, Laura, I can show you, go back one. So there's a summer triangle. It's this dotted triangle that's almost at the center of that map. So one point of the triangle is Vega, the weaving princess. The southernmost star is Altair, that's the cowherd. And then the northernmost star is Deneb, that's the tail of the swan, but you can imagine it as the magpies with outstretched wings flying right between them. So that's the setup. That's kind of the story that is overarching this time of year in the Chinese tradition. But I like to take advantage of it over here in the West as well, because we can all use more romance. All
I
right,
feel
so
like that's like way more romantic than Valentine's Day. Though you, again, you probably know more about Valentine's Day than I
well,
do.
I mean, I don't know about a relationship between Valentine's Day and the stars.
Yeah,
So I could maybe hunt around and try to find one, but this one is actually genuinely rooted in what's happening in the sky overhead.
gorgeous.
And
Thank
so
you.
it really has this lovely quality to it. There's several different versions of the story. There are many different stories about those stars, but that's kind of a basic one. And even Google today had that as their the picture. If you went to Google, it
Aw.
showed the, I think you pronounce it the Kixi Festival, Qixi, for love and romance.
Mm.
Okay, so we can go back on and we'll dance to the next slide. So now this is showing us, again, this is a detail from the Michigan State University map. And it's showing us a detail of what the moon is going to be doing immediately following the Feast of Michaelmas on September 29th. So starting at the bottom right corner of this map, you see the crescent moon and it says MON 30. That means Monday, September 30th, the moon is going to be a waxing crescent in the southwest sky. This will be about an hour after sunset. Then moving slightly up on Tuesday, October 1st, it will be a slightly larger crescent. Wednesday the 2nd, it will be even larger. Thursday, October 3rd, the crescent moon is going to be right next to Jupiter, 1 hour after sunset, looking south-southwest. That will be beautiful. You want to like mark your calendar to go see that. Then on the 4th, the moon will have moved on. On the 5th, you'll see it's right next to Saturn. And then this detail finishes on the 6th. But what I want to point out here is notice Saturn and Jupiter. So Saturn is just above Antares in Scorpio. And did I say Jupiter? Saturn, I meant to say Jupiter. Jupiter is just above Antares in Scorpio. And Saturn is just above the handle of the teapot in Sagittarius. Again, the Milky Way is not drawn on this, but the thickest part of the Milky Way is coming right down between those two planets right now. And on Friday, October 4th, the moon is going to be standing directly in front of the center of our galaxy. So if we were able to travel through the sky and go through that region where the moon will be on that night, we would go to the galactic center. This is where the sun was at winter solstice in 2012, when there was all this talk about the fulfillment of the Mayan calendar because the sun lined up with the center of the galaxy. So it's good to know this because Saturn and Jupiter are doing something remarkable in the next year, and you can start watching them in the sky now. You can see the moons of Jupiter, you can see the rings of Saturn if you're looking through a telescope, but just to get this spatial orientation. And also Saturn, culturally, Saturn was related to Father Time. When you look into the night sky, as far as the things that move go, it's the slowest moving of the objects that you can see with the naked eye. So Saturn was always regarded as the one that marked the boundary of time. Takes Saturn about 28 years to complete an orbit of the sun. And then Jupiter is going more than twice as fast. It's a lot brighter. Jupiter gets associated with things that have to do with the future and with bounty and with goodness. So you can imagine that Saturn on the left side of the Milky Way is kind of holding the course with things that we have to bear responsibility for out of time. And then Jupiter is coming on the right side of the Milky Way, bearing something that has to do with the future. And next year at winter solstice, they're going to meet. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but just to kind of give you a heads up, you should start watching these two right now and to imagine them kind of like these mighty pillars of wisdom that are standing in the night sky, kind of embracing the center or the heart of our galaxy. It's a really remarkable gesture. They don't always do this. So let's go to the next slide. And one of the ways that I have been imagining them, if you tap it once more, this is a Rosicrucian image of the sacred pillars that were standing outside of the entrance to Solomon's temple, and they're known as Yakin and Boaz. And Rudolf Steiner speaks a great deal about them. I'm going to grossly abbreviate, but just so that you can know that this is something that you can look at in relationship to Saturn and Jupiter. One of the ways that Rudolf Steiner describes this is that as the soul was incarnating toward an earthly biography, that there was a passing through or passing by the column that represented all things that would come from the future out of what would be wrought once the human being incarnated. And then at the end of the life, or the fulfillment of the life, the second pillar that you passed by was then about everything that was behind you and things of the past. So they kind of stood, I mean, you could pass through them as you went through Solomon's temple, you would pass through them in a moment, but to hold that consciousness of what precedes the incarnation on the earth and what follows afterward. So they were these sacred pillars that you consciously pass through. So if you can tap the advance one more time, and we can get the next image. So this is a rendering of what we think Solomon's temple looked like. So you can see that the pillars were, they flanked the front door, the entryway. They weren't used to support anything. So they were not load bearing. They were really there as a mark of, when you entered this temple of wisdom, then you were passing through into a potential experience of wisdom. And if you go to the next picture, one of the stories that Rudolf Steiner shares about this particular temple is, it's in the collection of lectures called The Temple Legend, and it has to do with the Queen of Sheba, Makeda, who travels from Ethiopia because she has dedicated herself to wisdom, and she hears tell about Solomon, and she comes to meet him and to learn from him because she wants to be with the most wise person in the world. And so this is a drawing, a sketch that was done by Rembrandt of her first visiting Solomon. But then what happens is she would like to see all of the artisans and the craftsmen and the masons and the builders that have built this temple. And Solomon has been, in one rendering of the story, the idea is that he has put himself forward as the one who has been able to coordinate all this, but actually it's his master builder, Hiram, who's able to make the sign to bring all the builders together. And then Sheba realizes that he's the master here, and there's jealousy that rises up between them. So if you want to know more about this story, it's wonderfully rendered in The Temple Legend, which is a collection of lectures by Rudolf Steiner about this mystery. And it's a really good reading while Saturn and Jupiter are on either side of the Milky Way right now. Okay, so I'm just going to take a breath because Laura told me that it's too much information.
No.
I always go really fast. I'm trying to slow down.
No, so Saturn and Jupiter are the pillars right now, with the Milky Way going between them.
And,
yes.
And right, the heart of the Milky Way galaxy standing exactly between them right now. So you can go out tonight and see them and imagine that center of the Milky Way. It's like halfway between them. And Jupiter, representing in ancient astrological tradition, always associated with things coming out of the future, and Saturn connected with those things from the past and structure, and they're standing on opposite sides of the center. And rather than, pulling on each other, it's how do past and future come together to kind of create this fullness at the heart center.
Yeah, I get us to say it kind of feels like that to me right now.
Yeah, right.
I don't know about everybody else on the call, but yeah, I feel like that's part of our human experience right now, at least for me personally. So that's what you're saying could be happening for people, right?
It could be. So if you think about, and especially at this time of year, okay, so yesterday was August 6th. It was the Feast of the Transfiguration. Today we're at the 7th night of the 7th moon. August 1st actually marked the halfway point through the summer season. So now we are closer to the end of the season than we are to its beginning. And what happens is at the beginning of the summer, we're at this full out breath. So if we think about the cycle of the year as a breathing process, the in-breath is coincident with winter solstice. The earth has breathed its forces within itself. And then that out breath begins after winter solstice and completes all the way at summer solstice on June 21st. And so now here we are almost 6 weeks later. We're kind of 6 weeks into the in-breath. It's hard to think about because we still want to be out there in the summer dream, and things begin to wake up and responsibility begins to call. And so when you're looking into the night sky, then you see this God of the past and the God of the future standing there, kind of holding the center, kind of as a gesture toward us to hold the tension of opposites. And that's a tall order in August. because it's easy to want to let go of the responsibility that's calling us from the earth. But there are festivals that happen that say, hey, human being, it's okay to take up your task with the earth again. And one of those festivals is the Feast of the Transfiguration, which comes on August 6th. So I want to back up, though, and talk about what happens before in the Christian story of the Transfiguration. 8 days before that happens, if we can go to the next slide, we have the sometimes described as the miracle of the feeding of the multitude with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. So this, in the description that comes in the New Testament, this happens about 8 days before the Transfiguration. So the Feast of the Transfiguration is placed in the calendar on August 6th. So we can imagine this around the end of July. So if you tap once again, this, what I see behind the star picture behind this mystery of the feeding of the multitude is the constellation Virgo and the constellation Pisces. So if you just tap, Laura, just two more times, once and then twice. So the first, that little blue image, that's actually the new image of the zodiac of Virgo from the original calendar of the soul. I placed it on the star map right where Virgo is. And then the red image is Pisces, which is over on the right, also from the new images of the zodiac, just so that you can get a sense of where they are relative to one another in the sky. At this time of year, when we're right here in the first week of August, when you look, you can go back to look at the map later when you get these slides. When you look toward the west, you see a single star there at the horizon. That's Spica. Oh, you went one too far. The star Spica is the brightest star in the constellation Virgo, the maiden. And oftentimes when Virgo is drawn, that star is drawn as a shaft of wheat. And so this is the harvest. This is the symbol of the harvest. The first wheat harvest is coming in at this time. And typically the ceremony that's done in this season of the year is called Lamas, from loaf mass, which means you take the wheat from the first harvest, you ground it into flour, you bake a loaf of bread, and then you offer that at the sacred site. You break bread together to bless the rest of the harvest. So this is standing behind the loaves of bread in this miracle of feeding the multitude. And then when Spica, the bright star in Virgo, and Virgo, they set, rising up in the east, you get the constellation Pisces, which are the fishes, the 2 fishes. And so this is the star picture that stands behind this miracle. And at this time of year in August, it's Virgo in the west setting, and Pisces, the fishes, rising up in the east. And then just beyond Pisces, Orion will start to come up. Now, when we get 6 months from now, in the spring, the opposite thing will be happening. Pisces will begin to set, Pisces and Orion will be setting, and Virgo will be rising up. And this is the season of the year when we start to when we're celebrating the Eastertide in the Christian tradition. It's the Feast of the Passover. It's the Festival of the Renewal of Fire. And what's happening in the star picture there, if we kind of bear this in mind, how Virgo is related to the harvest and the feeding of the multitude, and the role of the divine feminine in this mystery, then what we see happening in the spring, when Virgo is rising up, is that the moon will come full in the region of Virgo stars, and you can imagine it as though beneath her feet. And the celebrations of the renewal of life in the spring by human beings on the earth is like the light of the sun radiating toward that being. So she is clothed with the sun, she has the moon beneath her feet, and then we see the constellation Corona Borealis as the crown of stars on her head. So behind these deeds and these mysteries, there is this star picture of the divine feminine. And I don't know if you can see it well enough on this map, depending on the size of your screen, but if you see the constellation Virgo there where the blue image of the zodiac is, if you were to stand her up, the constellation of the starry crown is on her head. I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing that, Laura, but just so that if somebody wants to look closer at that star picture. And then to give more spatial orientation, if you if you advance 2 more times, the yellow image and then the kind of pinky lavender image, those 2 are Gemini and Sagittarius, respectively. So the Virgo Pisces axis represents the forces of dawn and dusk, And then Gemini, Sagittarius represent the forces of midday and midnight. So Virgo and Pisces are equinox, Gemini, Sagittarius are solstice. So Gemini is full out breath, Sagittarius full in breath, Virgo and Pisces are kind of halfway through that. They're the waking and the sleeping. It's kind of funny to see it when it's laid out rather than in a circle, but just to give you a sense of where they are in relationship to one another. So let's go to the next slide. So this is Errol Rosenkrantz' image of the woman of the apocalypse, which is the 5th apocalyptic seal. You can see she has the moon beneath her feet. She's clothed with the sun, and on her head, the crown of stars. So if you read in the book of Revelation, the beginning, chapter 12, behold, I saw a vision, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon beneath her feet, this crown of stars at her head. And so this is something to begin thinking about in this season, as the harvest is coming in. Virgo is starting to set, Pisces is starting to rise up. Something about the harvest in this season, or something that we carry with ourselves as we're trying to balance between this tension of opposites, past and future, and reconcile the kind of coming out of the summer dream and waking into our responsibilities with the school year starting and the colder weather and greater darkness, that this is already substance that will be weaving into our spring festival celebration when we have the opposite star picture happening with Virgo rising and Pisces setting. Okay, so some of these pieces are going to tie more into the rest of what I'm including. Okay, so remembering that the feeding of the multitude happens about 8 days before the Feast of the Transfiguration. And so the Transfiguration is a description of an event where the Christ being takes 3 of his apostles out into the night, and they are not able to sustain the consciousness of what happens. And the way Raphael painted this image, he shows the 3 apostles beneath him. They're Peter, James, and John. And then on either side of the Christ being, you have Elias and Moses. And then down in the foreground, you start to see this, there's only one feminine being, and she's kneeling down, she's draped, she has a blue cloak wrapped around her. She's pointing at a boy that seems to be having an epileptic seizure. He's described in several verses later, after the Transfiguration is described in the New Testament. There's a description of what's happening with that young boy. But I want you to notice the figure that's in the top half of the image on the left-hand side. He's wearing kind of a reddish tunic, and he's got his hands open. He's the only one on the earth that's actually looking at the Christ being. And so I'm not going to give too much detail about it, but I think that this is the being of Lazarus, who becomes Lazarus John. He's the one that is the initiate of the Christ being. And so Raphael is kind of giving the mystery of incarnation in this picture. What I really wanted to talk about more is the star picture that stands behind this image that Raphael created. So if you could advance the slide one more time. And I'm going to assume that there's a familiarity with Raphael's Transfiguration. It's a very famous painting. And so this shows us, again, it's just a star map. And you'll notice right at the center of it, there's Leo the lion. He's on this curved line that's going through. There's a straight line that goes right through the middle. Leo is up there kind of at the center on the curved line. But if you take that straight line right through, on the left-hand side, that's Virgo. Then you keep going, you cross through the neck of the serpent Hydra, keep going. Oh, there's Orion. He's a little bit squashed, but he's noticeable because he has a belt of 3 stars. You see his shoulders, you see his feet. And then just above him to the right is the constellation Taurus. Okay, so notice how Orion is there. He's right on the celestial equator. This is what makes him one of the most popular constellations around the world, because he's visible in both the northern and the southern hemisphere. Every year in the spring, you can see Orion in the night sky in the north and in the south. This is in the month of March, when we are getting ready to celebrate the festivals of renewal. The Lenten season is happening. We're preparing for Easter, preparing for Passover. Orion is visible around the world. And so to me, what Raphael seems to have done is paint his transfigured Christ being as though in the same position as the constellation Orion. So you see his 2 hands stretched up. They're like the 2 stars that mark the shoulders of Orion. His 2 feet One foot seems to be stepping into the world, and the other is connected to the spiritual world, the celestial world. And the fold in his garment, like the belt of stars on Orion's belt, are pointing down toward the only one that's looking at the Christ being. In the sky, the belt of Orion points toward Sirius, which is the brightest star in our sky. And also, interestingly, on either side of Orion, you have Taurus to the right, and then Leo up to the left. Now, if you advance one more time on the slide, you can see that this seems to suggest a relationship to the red window, which is a west-facing window at the Goetheanum at Dornach. So you see next to on either side of the I am figure at the center, you have the bull on the right side and the lion on the left side. So they seem to be kind of like right at the ears of that I am figure. And when you look at the star map of Orion, you see the bull on the right side, the lion on the left side. When you look at the figure of the transfigured Christ, you have Elias and Moses on either side of him. So it seems that this star picture, so beginning with the Orion region, which for the Egyptians in ancient Egyptian culture, part of the research I have found is that Orion is in some mythology connected to Osiris, who is the god of the dead. And the transfigured Christ being seems to answer the question that God makes to Job in the Old Testament: canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? If Orion is connected to Osiris, god of the dead, then this is a question: can you see life across the threshold of death? And in answer to that question, the transfigured Christ being is going to rise up across that threshold. So it's that the answer to God, to the Yahweh God of the Old Testament, that's asking this question. So behind that is this picture of Orion with Taurus, flanked by Taurus and Leo on either side. That seems to be the image that Raphael is painting. And then we see it again in the red window. I also just want to point out that in the sky, the star picture, to the left of Orion, this creature is the Hydra. It's the serpent. And on its back, not drawn in, but on its back are two constellations known as Corvus and Crater. Corvus, the blackbird; Crater, the cup. And these could be imagined as the three beasts that are at the bottom left of the red window. And so you see the human being in the red window as having to cross over an abyss where these beasts threaten. But there, standing before one, would be this transfigured Christ as the promise of being able to make it across that threshold. So when we're celebrating the Feast of the Transfiguration on August 6th, this region of Orion is just starting to come up into the sky. And when we get to the opposite time of year, when we're celebrating the Eastertide, that's when Orion is just beginning to set. But now what emerges is this imagination of the divine feminine, with the moon beneath her feet, clothed with the sun, the crown of stars. So they kind of stand in embrace on opposite sides of the year. And it's wonderful to have the imagery coming through art to kind of hold us as we look into the sky to try to understand the pictures, but then look throughout cultural history, how have human beings articulated this story that's being written across the sky. Okay, so do you want to, I can pause there for a moment?
I think a pause would be great. I feel like first I could look at both the red window and this painting forever and ever.
There's a lot, and I can just barely touch the surface, but it really means a lot to me to be able to share this imagination. I was actually coming back from my first trip to the Goetheanum when this occurred to me.
That there was
it felt
a parallel.
It felt like a gift that so again, this is it's not set in stone that this is what's going on, but what I'm seeing is, there seems to be a relationship here. The posture of the transfigured Christ in Raphael's painting suggests the constellation Orion. These two figures on either side that show up in the red window seem also to suggest that region of the sky. Right. with the three beasts. So we could write a book about that. For right now, we're going to honor the mystery. And if you get up early, you can start to look toward the east to see Orion You can imagine him as the transfigured Christ rising up over the eastern horizon at dawn.
That's great. I guess I wonder if we want to see if anybody has any questions at this point or anything they want to share. Yeah, wow. And they can type that in the chat, and we can keep going, and then as things come up, I'll let you know, Mary. I don't see anybody necessarily jumping on it right away, but we will have time at the end for questions too, just so people know. But thank you.
I'm not long-winded.
Yeah.
So well, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, sounds good.
So now we have, so it's the 7th night of the 7th moon. And so we've got the stars Vega and Altair on opposite sides of the Milky Way, kind of bookending what's directly overhead. And then we have Saturn and Jupiter on opposite sides of the Milky Way, kind of as past and future. So you've got that feminine and the masculine in the story of the 7th night of the 7th moon with the weaving princess and the cowherd. So feminine and masculine. Then with Saturn and Jupiter, we have past and future. And then you can tap it one more time. We also have 2 master Renaissance artists embracing this time in which we find ourselves, because the Transfiguration by Raphael was the last painting that he created. And it stood at the foot of his bed and was there when he died on April 6th in 1520. So that was 500 years ago next April. The image of John the Baptist by Leonardo was the last painting that he created. And that was, he died also 500 years ago in May 1519. So this whole time from May of 1519 to, or excuse me, May of 2019 until April of 2020, we're moving through the 500th year anniversary of the death of Leonardo and the death of Raphael and these 2 master works of art. So it's one way to think about, even if you're just looking and caught in the chaos of the news of the day, to imagine being embraced by these 2 incredible individuals and these 2 works of art. And John is representing kind of the fulfillment of an ancient tradition of prophecy and readiness for the incarnation of the Christ being. So in my imagination, he and Leonardo are representing Saturn, the Saturn side of the Milky Way, and the past. And he's pointing up to what will come and the promise of the future that will be realized through the incarnation of the Christ being. And it's almost like he's pointing toward what Raphael brings as his last gesture in that life as a master artist, which is the Transfiguration, the transfigured Christ, which kind of precedes not only the resurrection, but also the ascension. And actually, the Feast of Transfiguration happening on August 6th puts it 9 months ahead of May, which is a full human gestation. So once we've gone through Feast of Transfiguration, it's like we're pregnant with the kind of realization of what will come with the ascension 9 months from now. I hope that wasn't too confusing. I like to look in 9-month rhythms from feast days and festival days. So you should look like 9 months ahead of the Feast of the Transfiguration, 9 months after the Feast of the Transfiguration, what's going on. And here's what's really fascinating. 9 months ahead of the Transfiguration puts us in November. So let's see, November, December, January, February, March, April, June, July, August. Yeah, I always have to count on my fingers. So in November, there are 2 meteor showers that happen. The Taurid from Taurus, the bull, and the Leonid from Leo, the lion. So you've got the lion and the bull having meteor showers 9 months ahead of the Feast of the Transfiguration, which I have just connected to the constellation region of Orion and these 2 constellations of the lion and the bull. So it's really, really fascinating the way the star picture is continually informing our experience of the year and how these master artists are articulating this. It's kind of standing behind the mystery of the picture. So, so you've got Vega and Altair, feminine and masculine, with the 7th night of the 7th moon, Saturn and Jupiter representing past and future, and then we've got Leonardo and Raphael with this master artwork representing this mystery as well. Okay, so now we can go to the next slide, we're going to see, so remember, I just wanted to remember, see there's Saturn and Jupiter. So I'm imagining Saturn as as Leonardo's painting of John, that a fulfillment of what's coming out of the past. And so John, they're pointing toward the future, which is Jupiter. And I'm just allowing myself to imagine that as Raphael's painting of the transfigured Christ. This is the future. This is what's coming. This is the promise. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. And so we're going to see there's Leonardo's painting of St. John again, and then tap it one more time. And then maybe you have to tap it 3 more times because I think I put the description one more time. Okay, so I'm always looking for the ways that the feminine is represented in these stories, and something that I kind of bumped into that seems rather interesting to me is, while this John the Baptist is the last painting that Leonardo created much earlier, almost 15 years earlier. This is a sketch that was a cartoon preparing for his painting of the Virgin and the Child with Saint Anne and John the Baptist. So John the Baptist is just a child in this picture, but look at the hand of Saint Anne. She's pointing up. She has the same gesture that John Baptist has. And so he's always, when John is painted, Leonardo is always showing him pointing up toward the Christ being the one that is greater and higher than him. But here, because John is still a child, he's giving that anticipation of the future and that gesture of the hand pointing up to Saint Anne, who is the mother of Mary, who is the mother of the Christ child. So that's what's going on in this figure here. So I'm seeing that kind of preparation in this master artist through creating this imagination of the feminine that has to, bear this child into the world that then is going to bear witness to the Christ event.
And I couldn't see it, but is it here? Is this the hand that you're
It's
saying?
that. It looks like it doesn't belong there. It's like somebody he never finished it.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's that right there. So then if you look at the hand of the John pointing up on his final image of St. John, now he has grown into this task. Seems like a crude thing to say, but he's sorting this out. Is this master artist trying to work with how do you represent through art the fulfillment of something that has been prophesied and prepared for, not only through the epochs of time of human being on the earth, but through the rounds of earthly evolution, bringing it right down to this moment of being able to point at the event. And so he's sorting it out. He's got it here with this feminine, and then brings it all the way through to the end of his life. His final painting is very much about this gesture. I don't know if you can tell in this image, but if you look closely at the image of St. John, there's a cross that looks like it's resting in his hand.
Yeah, I can't see it, but I bet if I looked closer, I could.
Okay, so I'm associating all of these things with Saturn right now. Just so if you're wondering, why are we having this art history tour? What does it have to do with the stars? And also, the Feast of St. John happens on June 24th each year. And so June 24th is just 3 days after summer solstice. It's at that time where we have this full out-breath. In the work of Karl Koenig, he wrote this. There's a fabulous book called The Mystery of John, where they gathered together all the lectures that Karl Koenig gave every year at the Feast of St. John. And the way he describes summer solstice, the summer solstice out-breath, is that it's as though we breathe the year out to the celestial environment to receive kind of fructification and the seeding of the coming year. So we have in 2019, at summer solstice, at the end of June, already breathed out the impulse for 2019. And with John there as the witness of what will come, now that we have fully increased, the daylight begins to decrease, we breathe in the impulse for 2020. So we've already at summer solstice started to conceive of that. And when we get to this time in the middle of August is when it's almost like if you think about the beginning of a pregnancy, the first 6 weeks of a pregnancy is referred to as the organogenesis. It's the beginning of the development of the major organs, the heart and the ear, the lung. These things start to develop in the embryo. In the human biography, male and female, in the cycle of the year, you can imagine that if the St. John's time and the solstice time at the end of June is the conception, then we're about 6 weeks from that, coming into the middle of August. And now what we can begin to sense is an organ of perception, something that allows us to perceive the mystery of the coming year. So this is why, for instance, the fairy tale of the 12 dancing princesses, it begins in the middle of August, because the 12 princesses are like the 12 months of the coming year. And in the middle of August is when events can start to take place that will allow you to find the key to unlock the mystery of the coming year. And so to have this imagination of St. John in the role he plays in witnessing what we have conceived and what will bear fruit in the coming year, that starts to get really active right now in the middle of August. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And I also want to check our time. So we got about 15 minutes on the clock and a few more slides.
I just did something strange. Hang on a second.
Okie dokie.
Hang on. I'm just going to stop the share for 1 second, everybody. Hang on a second.
Okay, hope everybody's still there with us.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody's still here. Let's see. Let me get to that slide. What just happened? Mary, can you tell people how to find you if we want to get to
Yes,
you?
so I have a website, storytellersnightsky.com. I'm also active by the same name on Facebook, The Storyteller's Night Sky. I do a weekly radio program of the same name for Interlochen Public Radio, iprnews.org, and you can find me. That's every week, just a 2-minute story about what's going on in the sky. And yeah, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram at Starmares. Yeah, so probably the Facebook page. If you're a Facebook user, that's the easiest way to get my schedule of events. I'm very, very busy throughout Michigan, and I travel around quite a bit around the United States and internationally to teach about the night sky, teach about the stories. Okay, we're back.
We're back. Thank you.
Okay, good. So let's go on to the next slide.
Okay, there we go.
So we had an eclipse of the sun on July 2nd. It wasn't visible in the United States, but it was visible in Chile and in South America. When there's a total solar eclipse, you don't have to be in the path of the eclipse for it to be having an effect. Rudolf Steiner describes a solar eclipse as kind of like a safety valve on a steam engine where forces are released. And so it's kind of a gift from the celestial world to the earthly world that allows us to let off the steam. But one of the main things that happens during a solar eclipse, if you ask me, is not the amazing phenomena of seeing that moment when the moon is eclipsing the sun, but that the planet Venus, which is normally veiled in the daylight, becomes visible in the daytime. And so you could say that a solar eclipse is also an unveiling of Venus. So Venus was then unveiled on July 2nd. And Venus is wandering along. We're not seeing Venus has been in the morning sky, but on August 13th, Venus is going to get very close to the sun, their first meeting since this eclipse. So you could imagine your life thinking from the kind of through the lens of Venus, goddess of love and beauty, Venus who is sensitive to the heart, what lives as the secret in the heart of the human being. What's been going on in that area of your life since July 2nd until August 13th? So this happens every time there's an eclipse of the sun. Venus will be revealed in the daytime. So Venus, the next total solar eclipse is going to happen on December 14th in 2020. And then the next total solar eclipse that's coming through the United States, I'm biased toward this one because it will be happening on my birthday, April 8th in 2024. So I think the next slide, Laura, is going to show us what that eclipse path is. And so you can see the thickest part of that pink line at the center is the path of totality. You're learning about this 5 years ahead of time, so no excuse to not get involved. Notice up there in Michigan, that line goes right across Lakes Erie and Lakes Ontario. So 2 of the 5 Great Lakes will be totally eclipsed when that happens. So it's all about the water, but it's also about the divine feminine. So Venus is going to be revealed during the daytime. And I just want to show you down, you might not be able to tell, but the path of this eclipse is going right through Evansville, Indiana, and southern Indiana. And I want to show you what lives as statues down there, which are quite remarkable and quite beautiful. This is a statue that was commissioned after World War II, and it was originally called Our Lady of Delights. It's now called the Descent of the Holy Spirit. And you can see it's this divine feminine, and the large outer shape is almost like a womb, and she's ready to give birth. She's supported on either side by angels. There's a lamb that's waiting for this birth that's going to take place, so the lamb will no longer be the sacrifice. And it's hard to tell in this picture, but rather than having a face, it's like the uvula that's at the back of the throat of the human being hanging down there where the face would be, as though this is the mystery of giving birth to the Word. And so there were 3 of these statues commissioned. This one is in New Harmony, Indiana, and it sits at the west end of the roofless church. And the second one is in France, where the artist was living at the time. And the third one was intended as a gift for the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., but they wouldn't accept it. So the name of it was changed, and actually the third one ended up in Iona in Scotland, which is the burial place of Scottish kings. And it's at, I don't know, it's either at a monastery or a nunnery there. Fascinating, fascinating statue. The solar eclipse of April 8th, 2024, when Venus is unveiled, is going to go right over this region. Also in this area, if you tap the slide one more, there is a monastery, a Benedictine monastery. And on the ceiling in the chapel room where the monks meet regularly, they have the entire zodiac painted. And I took a picture of Virgo. There she is with the child at her feet, but she's holding, I think she's holding an ear of corn or a shaft of wheat. So the constellation Virgo is kind of depicted by the artist in this image. So this is in the chapter house in this Benedictine monastery that is also in Indiana, also in the path of the total solar eclipse that's coming in April of 2024. And then if you tap it one more time, this is an image of the statue of Isis, the ancient Egyptian goddess of fertility. She's veiled because in the ancient culture, you were not to remove the veil of Isis or risk death, certain death. Now, since Rudolf Steiner started speaking about the mystery of the new Isis, the divine Sophia, now it's death if we don't remove the veil of Isis. But she's holding in her hand the 3 flames of life. She's sitting on a complete circle of the zodiac. This statue is in West Branch, Iowa. It's slightly above where the path of the total eclipse will happen. But these 3 images are right at the heartland of the United States. And they lay really close to the 2 of them right in the direct path of totality of the next eclipse, and the third one of Isis just off the center line. It's a fascinating contemplation to think about Venus being unveiled, these goddesses in this path of the shadow, and what's happening in our environment and the emergence of feminine consciousness. So great pilgrimage to go see these things. And hopefully there are people on the call that have, or on the webinar, that have actually seen them. Okay, so let's go to the next image. I think it's a Botticelli. And so Venus is going to meet the sun at Superior Conjunction on August 13th. So that's just next week. It also is just 2 days prior to the Feast of the Assumption, which is a feast of the feminine, and kind of like the transfigured Christ, it's when she is assumed entirely into the heavens, into the celestial environment. And so this is a really important time of year for kind of recognizing being pregnant with the impulse of the new year. So she's always drawn or depicted as the pregnant virgin. And although the constellation Virgo is setting, it's like we're pregnant with something that is being protected by the starry worlds. Orion is rising back up into the sky, and we've got this imagination going with Saturn and Jupiter right now as St. John and the transfigured Christ. We've got the masculine and the feminine represented by the 2 stars, Vega and Altair, in the Chinese cultural tale of the 7th night of the 7th moon. So there's a lot that's built in culturally to what we see in the night sky right now. Venus has been morning star after the conjunction with the sun on August 13th. Venus is going to show up as an evening star probably in October is when we're first going to start to see it. Okay, so if we could advance. I'm getting a little bit worried that we're running out of time here, Laura. one of the most striking quotes for me that Rudolf Steiner gave was actually in the lecture that he was giving on New Year's Eve, New Year's Eve in 2022. Just after this lecture, the fire was discovered that consumed the Goetheanum. But one of the things that he said there was that the first beginning of what must come to pass if anthroposophy is to fulfill its mission in the world is that the human being's whole relationship to the world must be recognized to be one of cosmic ritual. So this is a fascinating way to consider something like the calendar of the soul, where we have these weekly verses that would kind of bring us into harmony with the waking and the sleeping of the spiritual mystery throughout the year. And then within that calendar of the soul, there were also the new images of the zodiac to give the star picture. And then there were these feast and festival days to kind of give us a way as a human being to enter in ceremonially and even ritualistically into the experience of the daily cycle. So looking at something like the Feast of the Transfiguration, the Feast of the Assumption, the Feast of the Ascension, all of these things informing the time of the year and standing behind them, this mighty star picture. This is something that really must wake up now. So to really get ourselves familiar with what's going on in the sky and how it, this seems like a cumbersome word, but how it interfaces with our calendar and with the festival cycle. So let's go to the next image. This is a list of things that I'm watching as a star lore historian and as somebody that watches the night sky. I think, Laura, I'm not necessarily going to go through each one. Everybody's going to get a copy of these dates, but it's showing you both what are the feast and festival days, and then what are some remarkable things to watch out for in the sky. One of the most important things that's coming up is the transit of Mercury across the sun on 11/11. That's going to immediately precede a full moon that's happening at the peak of the Leonid meteor shower. That's 9 months ahead of next year's Feast of Transfiguration. Then also Venus is going to meet Jupiter. Venus is going to meet Saturn. Then at the end of the year, Venus is going to be in the chalice cup of the moon, which is something that Rudolf Steiner points to in relationship to the mystery of the Holy Grail. I would be remiss if I didn't say anything about the big conjunction of planets, the big lineup that's going to happen on January 12th, 2020. Sun, Mercury, Saturn, and Pluto. A lot of astrologers are talking about this, so I'm not going to give too much detail to it, except to point out that Mercury is going to meet the sun in transit on November 11th, and then it's not going to meet the sun again until January 12th, when Saturn and Pluto are both there. So really pay attention to what's going on around the transit time. Do some ceremony. I'm really recommending that we read The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. I can talk more about that later, but just to get prepared. And then in March next year, Mars is going to meet Saturn at the beginning of Aquarius in the tropical zodiac, which is the same place that Jupiter and Saturn are going to come together. Winter solstice 2020, the great conjunction that only happens once every 20 years. So there's a lot of setup going toward those things. And I apologize that I didn't leave enough time to talk more about this slide. So Laura, let's go to the next and then just see if there's, so this is my concluding slide. This is a picture of the moon just a couple nights ago as it was setting over Lake Michigan. I was calling it the lavender moon, so I wanted to catch a picture of the lavender sky. But a really beautiful quote by Rudolf Steiner to again emphasize this experience of connecting to the celestial world as a way to understand the future of the human being and this growing awareness of our connection to the starry worlds. What we receive through anthroposophy is the essence of ourselves, which first floated towards the human being in the form of a celestial goddess. So I think I'll end there. You can read the rest of the quote. I've given the citation for where that quote comes from as well. And Laura, I'll give you those references as well that you can share with everybody. I think I hit it right at the end.
You did. Wow. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Mary. I feel like we definitely have another webinar.
Yeah, there's always a lot of stuff. It's like, here's what's going on right now and here's what it's pointing to.
Yeah, what it's pointing to. But wow, some really pivotal times this month. I'm so glad we were able to connect and look at this. And I think we should probably come back and do something.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to pay attention to next year is that we're coming into an election year in the United States.
Right.
So in January, we'll have this lineup of Sun, Mercury, Saturn, and Pluto. That's at January, at the beginning of the year. And then in December, we have Saturn and Jupiter doing a once every 20-year thing right at winter solstice. So the still point, past and future meeting at the still point. So this is a really important dynamic. We're already in the rhythm of it. You could look at each of those dates and go 9 months ahead. So 9 months before this lineup of Sun, Mercury, Saturn, and Pluto in January would have been April 2019 when Easter happened. And actually it's coincident with just the beginning of the Holy Week. And you'll just remember, like, okay, the dating for Easter in 2019 was connected to the moon. So just to look back at that time and say, okay, something was being conceived there that can already be informing what this January meeting of planets is going to be about. So that's one of the ways I would think about it.
Yeah, and you know what I love about what you do, Mary, and I want to open it up to questions right now. So I know some people might have to go, but for those of you that don't, we're just going to go a little longer, and you can type questions into the chat. I think I might be, if I'm going to stop the share, and then I might be able to see the Q&A too. So, but one of the things that I love about what you do is that you just find all these connections between things, and you find patterns, and you find cycles, like 9 month periods. And that is so helpful, I think, for all of us, because then we can begin to look at those things too. So I'm thinking of what was happening within me and St. John's. I had a little bit of a heads up that I needed to pay attention, because I knew there would be some culminating thing that would happen. Is it 9 months later? Takes us to what from St. John's?
Well, 9 months from St. John's is the Feast of Annunciation.
Right.
So from the 24th of June to the 25th of March, that takes us, that's a 9 month. So there's something announcing itself.
Yes.
You can look 9 months ahead and 9 months back from any point from today. Say, okay, what was going on 9 months ago that this is the birth? Or what am I conceiving now that 9 months from now is going to be a birth? So to look at it that way can really help to live in a larger rhythm and to not get caught in the chaos of the day-to-day. And then to couple that with major works of art, and then also with the star picture, it gives a sense of an evolving consciousness rather than just this thing that seems to be so chaotic in the day-to-day. Yeah. Are there questions that are popping up there?
There are a couple. I do want to let everybody know that this is being recorded. You'll get the slides. You can find out more about those statues in the Heartland. I think, man, I want to make a pilgrimage there.
For sure, we need to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe, to Scotland. That'd be super fun. But yeah, Eileen is asking, can you cite a good reference for the feast days in relation to anthroposophy? Is there a good...
Okay, so I have been doing a weekly email blast about the feast days relative to the calendar of the soul verses, and I will share my email address to anybody that wants to get on that list.
Great.
But also what I have done, typically the feast days are something that's celebrated by the Catholic Church. So you can get a book of saints, and that will give you the dates. I don't always abide just by the story that they give there. Like you can do great research to find out, like you can find the feast whose name that you have and what day is that. So your name day was really important. Also, I would recommend reading the short lecture by Rudolf Steiner called The Alphabet. So he talks about the alphabet, but in there he talks about name days and how the naming of an individual on the day that they're born, according to the saint whose feast day it is, why that's so important. And then in the original calendar of the soul, Rudolf Steiner included the feast days and the festival days. And so they really help to illuminate the calendar of the soul verses. The Transfiguration verse, there's a specific reference in the Hans Pusch translation into English where he talks about, to fashion worthily my soul that it be fitting raiment for the spirit. And raiment is a word that's used in the New Testament description of the Transfiguration. Like it's just right there. So I would get a book of saints. You can sign up to get the email from me. And I would also look at that lecture by Rudolf Steiner, just off the top of my head. Like those are the three things I would do. Thanks for the question.
No, that's great. Okay, and I'm just going to look a little bit more. I do have a question. Okay. Yeah, okay. I have a question. Somebody's asking me about some astrosophy courses, which I'm going to pass that along to you, Mary.
Okay.
If you're the person asking that, yeah, if you can email me, and I'll make sure that question gets to Mary, and I'll try to help you out with that. But Celie is asking, is Shiva's visit to Solomon in the temple a legend? Or wait, no. Okay. I read that wrong. Is Shiva's visit to Solomon in the temple legend, which is the lecture the book by Steiner is a lecture book. It's
okay,
a book.
So all of these lectures, they were not a book that Rudolf Steiner published. So it's one of those where he gave a lecture, somebody's taking notes, and the notes in the back of that book are extensive and really, really good. And the temple legend is completely described in the notes in that book. And it talks about the relationship between Hiram and Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. There's a beautiful poem that's attributed to the Queen of Sheba that I'll include in the references. But yes, Celie, that's there. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Mary, thank you so much. We always have more to talk about, and
yeah,
I know
more
people
than answer,
always.
right?
Well, no, that's the point in some ways, right? Just
to
have those questions really live with us. So, thank you so much for.
Can I just reflect back something also, though, as somebody who's trying to bring this content, that it's it's early August, and it's really hard to stay focused with this kind of content at this time of year. I found myself like, this is too much. Like I don't want to be cliched, but it's like, it's easier to just go be on the shore right now and not think so hard. So maybe if you get the recording of this, listen to it in September, it will be a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a good idea. Yep. And we will include your email in the follow-up so people can get on your list.
Okay. That information. Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks always for the opportunity. Thanks everybody for showing up. And I love the questions. If you give them to Laura and she can send them on to me, then I can answer them through the email that's going to come.
Thank you everybody for being on this call in August. We love it.
Okay, good.
All right. Good. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye everyone.